Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take the source material you're curious about, the complex articles, the challenging ideas, and really try to turn them into knowledge you can carry with you.
Mm-hmm.
And our mission today is centered on, well, a really radical and counterintuitive idea.
It is. It's this idea that the simple act of saying no or just choosing refusal is often misinterpreted.
And not just misinterpreted, but
Yeah.
seen as harm,
Mm-hmm.
as an act of aggression, almost immediately.
Exactly. It's that dynamic where a quiet request for space is somehow heard as an act of attack.
Mm-hmm.
And we're diving deep into the analysis by Jaime Hoerricks, PhD, specifically from their work when refusal is read as harm.
Quite a title.
It is. And it mentions autistic boundaries, queer time, and the violence of forced repair. So our goal isn't just to, summarize it. We want to understand the actual mechanisms of that misreading. Why is it so pervasive?
Okay, let's unpack this then, because the core thesis is genuinely surprising. It really challenges a fundamental social expectation.
It does.
Hoerricks suggests that setting a boundary, or pressing pause, or even just allowing a situation to stay unresolved for a bit, that this can be a profoundly ethical act, an act of care.
Right. And yet we are so conditioned to expect the opposite.
We are. We expect immediate closure and immediate justification, fix it now.
And any deviation from that is instantly labeled. It's a personal slight, or as the author puts it, a failure of love.
And here's the twist. The author argues that demanding that immediate closure, that forced repair, that's where the real relational violence actually begins.
Precisely. And to get this, we have to start with the specific context the author is working in. This piece isn't just about, general communication breakdowns.
Right.
It specifically traces how boundaries set by autistic, queer, and trans individuals are. Well, they're disproportionately and very quickly recast as cruelty.
So why those specific groups?
Because they often operate outside of what the source calls the dominant relational timeline.
The dominant relational timeline. Okay, that's a key concept. For you, the listener who might not be familiar with that framework, could you break down what Hoerricks means by that, tying boundaries to things like queer time and autistic boundaries?
Absolutely. So think of queer time or crip time, or in this context, autistic boundaries, as a deliberate resistance to the normal rhythm of life.
The one we're all sort of expected to follow.
Exactly. Dominant culture often dictates not only what you should achieve, marriage, career milestones, all that, but when and how quickly you should resolve any social or emotional complexity. That's the timeline.
So if you're autistic, for example, your processing speed might mean you need a 20-minute pause before you can actually give an answer that feels authentic to you.
Right. Or if you're queer, your whole relational map, your definition of family, it might just defy the neat linear story that other people expect.
Okay, so I'm starting to see the connection here.
Yeah. If your needs already fall outside that very linear, immediate neurotypical timeline, your boundary isn't read as a neutral request. It's not seen as just managing your capacity.
It's seen as something else.
It's read as intentional noncompliance. The time you need to step back is automatically suspect. And so the refusal itself gets interpreted through this lens of resistance, not a lens of self-preservation. That's really the foundational reason their quiet refusal gets amplified into cruelty so fast.
This brings us to the ethics of refusal itself. And it's not about grand gestures. The source says this kind of boundary setting involves 3 specific, very subtle actions.
That's right.
Stepping back, staying unresolved, and pressing pause. And together, they form a kind of ethical framework. So what does the author mean by a boundary being a quiet form of ethics?
It's about reclaiming these actions. Our social default is to label them as, avoidance or passive aggression.
Right, and just dodging the issue.
Exactly. But Hoerricks argues these are intentional, ethical choices. So take stepping back. This isn't ghosting. It's recognizing you need immediate distance so that your next engagement, the one that comes later, is genuine. You're prioritizing the quality of the future interaction over the demand of the present one.
And what about staying unresolved? What does that actually look like? Because, in a work setting or a high-stakes relationship, that pressure to fix it now is just immense.
It is. It looks like saying, I hear the weight of that, and I am committed to this, but I cannot give you the answer right now. It's the act of refusing to put a quick superficial bandage on a deep wound just because the other person finds the open wound uncomfortable to look at.
That's a really powerful way to frame it. Okay, and the third one, pressing pause, It's about slowing the whole thing down.
It's decelerating the entire emotional exchange. It's demanding time to process sensory information or emotional weight or just cognitive complexity. When you use these three quiet ethics, stepping back, staying unresolved, pressing pause, you're trying to maintain relational integrity.
But because it disrupts the other person's timeline.
They experience discomfort, and that discomfort takes us directly to the moment of misreading.
So if the action is silent, let's talk about the noise of the reaction. Yeah. The author dedicates a lot of space to what they call the moment the room turns. And for you, the listener, trying to get a handle on these subtleties, this section is full of concrete examples. The key thing here is that the boundary setting is, and I'm quoting, rarely dramatic.
The author really emphasizes that all the theater, all the emotional combustion, it's entirely on the side of the reaction, not the refusal.
So give us a scenario.
Okay, so a friend or a colleague asks you a complex, emotionally loaded question, and the person setting the boundary just takes a calm, sustained breath, a pause, and says, I need a day to think about that. Or maybe they don't even say anything, they just delay the response.
And the source points out the key details. The boundary is set calmly, without theater, and, most importantly, the explanation doesn't arrive immediately, or, as they say, not in the shape expected.
And that's where the tension starts to build.
Yeah.
Because nothing overtly negative has happened. No one has shouted. No door has been slammed. But that complete lack of dramatic action is what sets the stage for the atmospheric change. The expected social performance, the immediate reassurance, the immediate yes. It just doesn't happen.
This is where the author's language really helps you feel it. The source details these observable changes that follow a calm refusal. Changes so subtle you can't quite name them, but your body notices.
Yes.
They describe how the temperature in the room drops by a fraction, the air tightens, the whole rhythm of the exchange changes, and it's not enough to name outright, but enough that the body notices. It's a gut feeling of disruption, not an actual attack.
That visceral description is so important because this is the moment the observer's internal dialogue shifts. It goes from neutral observation to conflict. What was just genuine curiosity about the other person's answer, it starts to lean forward. What was interest sharpens its edges.
I do wonder, though, how much of that is just practical. I mean, if someone presses pause on a time-sensitive project at work, a certain amount of frustration or anxiety seems natural, right?
Right.
How does the author differentiate that from this aggressive misreading?
That is a great question because the distinction is all in the attribution. Legitimate frustration would be, okay, this delay is a problem, but I respect that you need the time. It acknowledges the need.
Okay.
The aggressive misreading, however, takes the tension created by that pause, which is really just internal anxiety over a disrupted timeline, and it projects it outward as a moral failure. They don't blame the situation, they blame the character of the refuser.
Which means the negative labels arrive fast, almost instantly.
Incredibly fast.
The source states, the misreading arrives quickly. The person who just calmly stepped back is now labeled cold, cruel, unreasonable. And that just shows the speed at which refusal goes from being this neutral act of self-care into being seen as active, deliberate harm. You're basically being punished for prioritizing your own capacity.
And that system of punishment brings us right back to the core framework, the violence of forced repair. That calm, undramatic pause, it challenges a really deep cultural pressure.
Which is?
The overwhelming demand to immediately resolve conflict, to fix emotional discomfort right now, regardless of the refuser's actual state.
And the author uses the word violence very deliberately. Why that word? Why link the pressure for resolution to violence?
Because it's the violence of demanding someone override their authentic self, their actual needs, their cognitive or sensory limits, purely to satisfy the comfort or the timeline of another person. It's a demand for emotional performance over psychological integrity.
So forcing someone to resolve a crisis when they're already at their limit?
In Hoerricks' framework, that is an act of erasure. It's basically saying your boundary, your reality is less important than my immediate ease.
Which connects so powerfully back to the marginalized groups you mentioned at the start, autistic, queer, trans individuals, who are often already forced to mask or perform or simplify their lives for others.
Precisely. For them, refusal breaks that mask. It's not just a deviation, it's a disruptive act of authenticity. And it forces the observer to sit in their own discomfort for a minute. And our society has very little tolerance for that kind of shared, unresolved discomfort. The whole system is built for speedy resolution, even if it's a fake, unsustainable one.
So if we look at the positive ethical spin the author provides,
Yeah.
the message is really clear. Stepping back, staying unresolved, pressing pause, these are not social defects.
Not at all.
They are necessary, quiet ethics that prioritize sustainable care both for the self and for the relationship over that immediate, often superficial, manufactured resolution.
And the synthesis here is that this societal difficulty, this trouble we have accepting a quiet refusal, it gets amplified when it comes from a person whose relational rhythms already defy the dominant expectations. Their boundary isn't just a disruption, it's read as confirmation that they're operating in bad faith.
Just because they won't conform to the expected rhythm of repair. This whole deep dive really shows that the problem so often isn't in the act of refusal itself, not in the calm pause or the lack of drama. It's in the observer's expectation that all relationships have to follow this predictable rhythm that leads to immediate closure.
We mistake process for negative intent.
Yeah. The refusal is just information. It's information about capacity, the negative judgment. That's the reaction to the discomfort of not getting what we want when we want it.
And that leaves us with a final thought for you to consider. If we really internalize this idea of the violence of forced repair, how would our interactions change? What if we could train ourselves to read a quiet pause, not as an insult, not as cruelty, but as a guarantee?
A guarantee of what?
A guarantee that the eventual response will be more thoughtful, more honest, and ultimately more sustainable. Maybe the true test of understanding is just being able to sit patiently in that unresolved space and accepting that a quiet refusal might just be the truest form of care someone can offer.
A really necessary perspective on the ethics of stepping back and the tyranny of the immediate. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
My pleasure.
We'll catch you next time.